Ladies and gentlemen, Clair Obscur has some very unique mechanics, from Pictos changing to Luminas, character stats, and a bunch more. So let's talk all the things you're going to need to know to make sure you have a nice, smooth playthrough. Let's go. So the first thing I want to cover is the Picto system, because when I first started I was a bit unsure exactly how this thing worked. So let's clear this up. The way Pictos work is you're going to want to be balancing these with your Luminas to make your character extremely powerful. As we see here, we have our Pictos on the left hand side. These items have passive bonuses alongside stat increases that make them very powerful. Now keep in mind, Pictos are only able to be equipped on one character at a time, but once equipped they level up, and after 4 battles they will become Luminas. And it's your choice from there to keep it as a Picto or use it as a Lumina. Now, one of the main differences between Pictos and Luminas is that Pictos keep the passive bonus attributes, whereas Luminas do not. If you choose to use the same thing as a Lumina, you're going to lose that stat that comes with it and are only going to gain that passive effect. So this is just one way and something to keep in mind as you start to craft your builds. You can look at these items and start to figure out what stats you're looking for versus what the passive bonuses are actually doing for you. And you can decide whether it's better off or not just to keep it as one of your main 3 Pictos, or just shift it over so it becomes a Lumina. On the right hand side of the screen, you can see the Lumina selections. And these are essentially free passive bonuses that you can start stacking up depending on how many Lumina points each character of yours has. So you're always going to have your 3 main Pictos selected at the top, and from there you can start scrolling down, and any additional item with that light blue number is an extra ability that your character has. So depending on how many Lumina slots you have, for example, here I have 19 out of 29, which means I have a few slots missing, and Luminas can also be selected on any and all your characters. So again, as long as you have the points available to equip them, you can add them to everyone, even if it's already selected on another character. Later in the game, there are Pictos that, once leveled, will take up a lot of Lumina points to equip, and this is another option that you're going to be faced with, where if it's that good, you're going to want to keep it as a Picto, or you're going to find yourself using up a lot of the points available as a Lumina. It's a very fun system once I ended up wrapping my head around it. Now, we've been talking about Lumina points, and the way you increase these with each tune is going to be through the Curator. You're guaranteed to find him, and he's not too far into the game, but once you have him unlocked, you can add these points to your party by using the item's color of Lumina that you find out in the world and at random vendors. I would highly recommend you buy all the colors of Lumina you find from these vendors whenever you have the points available, or as soon as you see them, so you can have as many of these Lumina slots available as possible. The next thing we need to touch on is our stat priority, and this will vary a bit from person to person on exactly what stats are most optimal for you. But the best stat in the game, no matter who you are, is going to be agility. And it looks like the soft cap, where we start receiving some diminishing returns, will be around 50. So we have plenty of time to pump this stat before that comes into play. The reason this is such a top-notch stat is because it primarily increases your speed, and speed in these types of games is extremely important. When you have more speed than the enemy you're going up against, that means you're going to have the first turn priority, and even better than that, depending on how many points you put into agility, you're going to have multiple turns and stay on the offensive before your enemy is able to even go through one round of attacks. It's extremely powerful, and I wouldn't want you to sleep on this stat. I also want to mention, depending on what weapon you have, the scaling of these stats will also be increasing other stats passively. So not only will it affect your speed, but it could very well be affecting your attack power and defense as well. The next stat is where the options start to come into play, because luck and vitality are both very important, but one will always outweigh the other by simply asking yourself the question, how good am I at survivability? Meaning pulling off those dodges, parries, jumps. If you find yourself struggling in these categories, or it takes you a while to learn the moveset to a new enemy and you're dying because of it, health will be your best friend here. However, if you answered, I never get hit and I can parry like a pro, then luck is your next best bet. Sitting around 15 to 18 luck is going to give us that 15% critical strike chance, and once you start progressing through the game, you'll start finding 15 to 25% critical strike chance Pictos that's going to set you up for a good time later on. Besides those stats though, I find myself alternating between might and vitality, with a much bigger focus on might to give me that extra attack power that we just love so much. I also want to point out, for the people that are prioritizing health in the early to mid game, later on you're going to find Pictos that increase your health by like 2,000, and some give even more than that. So all I'm saying is go ahead and give yourself a comfortable cushion with health. There's just no need to kind of go all over the top with it. And then we have defense, which is something I tend to ignore since we have so many ways to completely avoid damage in this game. But not only that, we're also going to be receiving Pictos that give us 100 points or even 1,000 points of that defensive stat. So even if you don't put points into defense, the options are still there if you find yourself needing a bit more of that anyways. So early stages of the game, focus on your 4 core stats first, starting with agility, then add some luck. Then you can start dumping points into either health or might, which in my case, the focus would be way more on might for that extra attack power. The next little tip, and something I recommend you resist doing, is upgrading your weapons at least early on, because we receive a lot of weapons in this game that give different damage bonuses to different elements, and as you know, a lot of these enemies have different weaknesses to specific elemental types. So what you don't want to do is sink a whole bunch of upgrade catalysts into many different weapons, because you're going to end up spreading yourself too thin and easily run out of these upgrade materials by the time you find a weapon you really like, or is just a big ass base upgrade from the one that you already had. And having one very powerful weapon, even if it meets up against the enemy that has resistance to that, will be much better, simply because the power upgrades you get from like level 7 to level 8 is a pretty massive power spike. So the point is, try to only upgrade one main weapon for each person, because one weapon early on becomes extremely powerful if you focus on it. Now, as we spoke about at the top, the curator is where you're going to go to upgrade your luminas, but this is also where you're going to be going to upgrade your weapons and expedition resources. So make sure you're coming back to camp often. Not only are there extra cinematics and backstories you get for all your characters, but we're also going to be receiving tint upgrades through the merchants and throughout the world. This upgrades your healing, your energy, revive abilities, allowing us to revive our tunes with a lot more health. So making sure you don't overlook these can help you out in a pretty big way. Another interesting detail I wanted to bring up, if you find yourself getting turned around a lot or getting lost in the game like me due to its just pure beauty, is that the light sources that you see scattered around the map, like the lamps, indicate that you're going the correct way. So if you find these lamps leading you in one direction, but you have other paths to explore, you now know you won't be progressing the main storyline or the game until you go back to the path with these lanterns. So it's a very easy way to navigate through this world at a quick glance. Moving on from traversal, you definitely want to be paying attention to enemy weaknesses and elemental resistances, because you're going to find enemies that are not only resistant to specific element types, but some, for example, like versing this fire demon, will absorb and even heal back the damage you do to it with other fire abilities. Same thing with earth spells against earth enemies. I mean, it makes sense, but just keep it in your mind as you go. Moving along from that, pay attention to each interaction you have with various NPCs you find out in the world, because depending on the dialogue and who you approach these NPCs with, you might miss out on a lot of appearances and weapons, as they actually look to speak with specific individuals from your party. So if the dialogue looks funky, or they're just asking for something specific, swap around your characters and try talking to them again, because you're going to be surprised with just how many rewards you'll get or would have potentially missed from outfits, pictos, weapons, if you don't swap your characters when talking to these NPCs. Another big mistake I was making is thinking that you could take on every single enemy as soon as you find them, and that is not the case. If you come across some enemies that are just straight up one-shotting you, yes, you could play around them and try to master their movesets and all that, but please keep in your mind that you should be coming back to these enemies. They're not there for you to take out right away. There's plenty of side objectives and quests for you to go complete, then come back to these areas to defeat them later. So what I'm saying is, wait till you unlock higher level gear, level up a bit more, get deeper into Act 2 or 3. Just note the areas that you're leaving these bosses at to come back to later. And you don't need to smash your head into a brick wall if you don't really want to. But what are your thoughts on the game so far? I am absolutely loving it. By the way, I stream every Tuesday, Thursday, and most of the time over the weekend, so come stop by if you're interested in that. Leave any questions or comments down below, and feel free to check out some of these other playthroughs coming up on your screen next. Toodles!